June 28th is going to be here before you know it. And there are 6 candidates vying for the Republican nomination to take on whoever comes out of the Democratic primary, because Governor J.B. Pritzker, the Democratic incumbent, he does have a Democratic opponent on that ballot in Beverly Miles. So we'll see what happens with that, of course, come June 28th. But you've got 6 candidates vying as Republicans to take on Governor J.B. Pritzker in November. And we've got just a few weeks left. All right, so June 28th is going to be here before you know it, and we'll keep you posted on all of what those candidates have to say. We've already heard from some in the past few weeks. We'll hear from more in the weeks ahead. But here with Springfield's Morning News, I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. Let's talk now about polling data. And Cor Strategies put together polls, and they review a bunch of different things. And in particular, they looked at the 6 candidates for the GOP nomination here in Illinois. And Collin Corbett with us on WMAY from Cor Strategies. Collin, thanks for taking time this morning. How are you?
I'm great, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and get into this. A lot of people driving to work right now, they want to know how so-and-so's polling, because I think a lot of voters out there, they haven't done the dig into who these candidates are. They may have heard some headlines here and there, but what are you finding from the polling data that you guys put out there?
Sure. So what we see right now is that Richard Irvin has a very strong lead with 33% of the vote, which in a candidate with 6+ candidates, or in a race with 6+ candidates, 33% is a very strong number. Darren Bailey is in second at 21%. And then the rest of the candidates are 10% and below. So at the moment, it appears that it's ending up to be a 2-person race.
So when it comes to these types of large, numbers of candidates, 6 candidates in a race is quite substantial. What do voters deal with when they have to face that many candidates?
Voters don't pay much attention to politics anyways. It's a constant struggle for candidates and for those who work with candidates, just getting voters to pay attention long enough to actually hear a message. When you then add to it that there's so many candidates, it does make it even harder for voters who are naturally busy with, real life, to try to figure out who the candidates are. And so as a result, it makes it even harder for those candidates to get their messages in front of the voters. That's why you see that the candidate in the lead is in the lead, because they're putting a lot of time and effort and mostly money into pushing their message right in front of voters, so the voters can see it while going on with their normal daily lives.
We're talking with Collin Corbett. He is with Cor Strategies here with Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. So again, I want you to go over some of the poll findings, but as we look at some of these slides here about the 6 different candidates and where they're at right now, talk about the regional aspect here, who you guys polled, and what some of the sentiments you asked about were.
Sure. So we polled likely Republican voters in the upcoming Republican primary. So the people that we talked to are highly likely to cast their ballots in this race. So their opinions, of course, matter the most in a race like this. And we polled all throughout the state of Illinois. So we've got numbers, in Cook County, in the suburbs, and throughout the rest of the state. And we did see a dynamic where candidates were stronger in some areas and weaker in others. For instance, Darren Bailey has certainly been relying on his support outside of Chicagoland, where he's doing much better. He has 27% of the vote outside of Cook and the suburbs. But even then, he's still trailing Richard Irvin, who has 31% of the vote in the rest of the state. So while Darren Bailey is definitely doing better outside of Chicagoland, it still isn't enough to be in first, even in that region. And then you've got some candidates who do better in Cook County and the suburbs. For instance, Richard Irvin's got 38% of the vote in Cook County because it's expensive to get your message to the voters in Cook County, and he's the only one who's really doing it to that level. So he's at 38% in Cook. And then in the suburbs, you see some candidates doing a little bit better, like Gary Rabine's doing a little better in the suburbs. Even Jesse Sullivan's doing decent in the suburbs. But really, it still comes down to Irvin and Bailey. It's definitely looking like it's going to end up being those two fighting for first and second.
When you guys have done similar type of polling in the past, have you seen very similar types of outcomes where you may have a dearth of candidates in a race, but really it's just a couple that rise to the top here?
Yeah, I mean, we humans crave simplicity. So if you can make it a binary choice between 2 options, you're going to do it. And so this is fairly common that in a larger race, not all of them are gonna rise to the top. And it really is becoming a choice between the candidate who's more well known and a candidate who's got more grassroots support. And it's a fairly common thing that a race like this might start to towards the end. I mean, 7 weeks left. We're, as you said earlier, it's starting to really get towards the end here. It's common that it might start to crystallize into a choice between two or maybe three. I mean, Sullivan's not out of this race. If he gets his message out there and pushes, he could certainly make it a three-person race, but he really only has a few weeks left to do that.
Well, and I see here, we're looking at some slide decks here on the live video, and you have the candidate opinion section here, and that seems to be where Sullivan could go right up against Bailey, who's right up against Irvin. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so one of the things we test, in addition to the matchup where we ask who would you support, we also ask people's opinions of the candidates. It's really helpful to have that data so we can get a feel for why each candidate is performing, how they're performing in the poll. And so, as you intimated, we check to see how people felt about each of these six candidates. And two things that we saw is, number one, yes, Richard Irvin has the strongest name recognition, meaning the number of people or the percentage of people who had an opinion about him was as high as 71%. That's a very high number. A lot of people are aware of Richard Irvin. The next two candidates, in terms of how much name recognition they have, are Bailey and Sullivan. They each have roughly 50 or 51% of name recognition between the two of them. So that's a decently strong number, not strong enough to win a Republican primary statewide, but it's definitely a number that puts you in position. And then the key to that is we ask, are you favorable or unfavorable in your opinion of this individual? And Bailey was what we call a net plus 12, meaning 12% more favorable than unfavorable. Irvin was the same at plus 12. Sullivan was only plus 3, so again, he's got a little bit more work to do. But that's another indicator to us that Bailey is in striking distance of Irvin with similar favorability numbers. So he's definitely not out of this race yet.
Again, we're talking with Collin Corbett with Cor Strategies. Collin, do you guys anticipate doing another poll heading into the final days of the primary season?
We will certainly consider it. I mean, we do polling all around the country. Generally, we're paid by a client to do a poll. But sometimes like this, when we see nobody doing any polling, we just do it on our own and eat the cost ourselves. My guess is as we get closer to the end, there'll be so many polls, we'll frankly all be sick of polls. At that point, I'm not going to pay out of pocket to put yet another one on the pile. But if for whatever reason there aren't polls out there or maybe they're just not reputable, certainly we would put another one on the field to get some updated numbers.
Well, Collin, greatly appreciate you taking the time with you. We'll likely talk again about polling data in the future. Collin Corbett with Cor Strategies, greatly appreciate it, and take care, all right?
Right. Thanks for keeping your listeners apprised of the race. This race is really important, so I'm glad you're doing this.
Absolutely. 8:19 now with WMAY, and let's take a look at Springfield's 5-day dependable forecast.